Whenever I talk about 2004's The Batman, I always point out what a daunting task it must have been to be the first Batman cartoon to follow Batman the Animated Series. BTAS is still held in high regard some 30 years later because of their thoughtful reinventions of many classic villains. The writers on The Batman knew that it would be foolish to simply copy BTAS. What's the point in doing exactly the same thing over again? So they set out to do their own thing. Some of their takes were fairly interesting, like their Clayface Ethan Bennett, but others, not so much. Their take on Bane, for instance, is one that has left me scratching my head for a while. In the comic books, Bane was a capable foe of Batman's both physically and intellectually, yet so few adaptations seem to do him justice, especially the Batman's version. But before I get to that, it's important to talk about the comic book version of Bane, to provide some much needed context. Bane made his first appearance in a special one-shot comic, Batman: The Vengeance of Bane, in 1993. At the time, DC Comics was going through a period of breaking down their biggest heroes, before eventually building them back up again. They had recently killed off Superman, turned Green Lantern into a villain, and they broke Batman's back. Bane was created to be the villain that would break Batman. The man known as Bane was born in Santa Prisca, an island nation torn apart by civil war. His father had been a part of the losing side of the war and he fled the island, leaving behind his pregnant partner. In his absence, his unborn son was forced to serve his prison sentence, life imprisonment, within Peña Duro, the most hellish prison on Earth. The boy didn't have a name and his early years were spent in isolation with his sickly mother, but when she passed away, he was sent to the general population. When a prisoner named Trog tried to defend him from being victimized by another prisoner, he fell and suffered a serious head injury. While in a coma, he communed with an apparition of his future self, telling him he was destined to become a great man, but he would have to overcome his fears, which took the form of a massive bat. Upon waking from his coma, the boy brutally murdered the prisoner responsible for his fall, and he was cast into solitary confinement for years, with the warden dubbing him Bane. This was no normal cell, however, as each night the room flooded when the tide came in, forcing Bane to fight for his survival each and every night. Over the years, Bane became something of a legend among the inmates, and when he was eventually released from solitary, he was treated as a hero. Now that he had more freedom, he spent his time reading as many books as he could get his hands on, teaching himself new languages and martial arts. He was essentially a self-made genius and physical marvel in the mold of Doc Savage from the old pulp comics, but with a persecution complex. It was during his studies that he learned of Gotham City and its hero Batman. Remembering his vision as a child, he realized that in order to become his best self, he would need to venture to Gotham and defeat Batman. When the US government trialed a new, powerful steroid codenamed Venom on the prisoners, Bane saw this as an opportunity to escape and claim his destiny. Powered by Venom, Bane was able to massively increase his physical strength, making him more powerful than ever. Rather than taking on Batman immediately, Bane instead took a more strategic approach, blowing up Arkham Asylum and releasing all of Batman's foes at once. Rounding up all of the escaped villains exhausted him, and when he was at his weakest, Bane struck. Bane was eventually defeated by the replacement Batman Jean-Paul Valley and was sent to prison, where he overcame his addiction to Venom cold turkey. His return to prison and lack of Venom led to him gaining weight and losing the respect of the other prisoners. In order to correct the path of his life, Bane did what he knew best. He murdered another prisoner and was cast into solitary confinement, where he focused on rebuilding his body and clearing his mind. Upon release, he staged a breakout and vowed to prove himself once more. It was here that Bane crossed paths with Ra's al Ghul and the League of Assassins. Ra's recognized Bane's intelligence and prowess and decreed that he would be a suitable heir. However, his daughter Talia was less keen on the idea. This further fueled Bane's inferiority complex, once again feeling like he'd been upstaged by Batman, and so he sought to prove himself Batman's better once and for all by helping Ra's unleash a fatal virus on the world. While Bane was keen to become Ra's al Ghul's heir, he didn't really share the same ideology. All he wanted to do was prove himself to be superior, and that insecurity is ultimately what drives him and invariably leads to his downfall. His very first on-screen adaptation came in Batman the Animated Series, where his comic book origin was streamlined. Rather than a persecuted child, Bane had been a nameless prisoner who was experimented on. After escaping from prison, he became a high-priced mercenary, paid only in diamonds, and accepted a hit on Batman. The creative team really played up on Bane's Hispanic roots, giving him a more expressive luchador-style mask inspired by legendary movie star and professional wrestler Blue Devil. Specifically, his film La Sombra del Murciélago. I've totally butchered that, but it means Shadow of the Bat. In this film, Blue Devil fought against the Bat, a hideously disfigured luchador that lived below ground, kidnapping people and wrestling them to prove his superiority. Beneath his mask, the Bat's face was effectively split down the middle, one side handsome, the other side warped and deformed. Now who does that remind us of? There, Bane was cunning, setting traps for Batman, and was physically dominant. However, the BTAS creative team immediately identified a weakness that they felt that Batman wouldn't be able to miss: his Venom dispenser on his arm. The ending of the episode calls back to the Nightfall storyline, where Bane lifts Batman above his head, primed to break his back. But this time Batman jams a batarang in the Venom dispenser, causing Bane to overdose. Bane didn't really have a particularly significant role in any other episodes. His most notable appearance came in Batgirl's nightmare hallucinations in the new Batman Adventures episode Over the Edge, but considering that was all a dream, I don't really count it. Bane also appeared in the Superman the Animated Series episode Nighttime, where Batman mysteriously vanishes and Superman steps in to restore law and order in Gotham. Bane assembled a crew of his own, the Riddler to entrap their foes and Mad Hatter to control them. Bane would beat all who resisted into submission, thanks to his new, more powerful Venom formula. But he was no match for Superman, dressed as Batman. And of course he acted as the Muscle in the direct-to-DVD movie Batman: Mystery of the Batwoman. When I talked about the DCAU version of Bane in an older video, which I have linked to in the info button in the top right corner as well as this video's description, there were a number of people that expressed dissatisfaction with this version of Bane. They argued that he was beaten too easily and he wasn't taken seriously enough. So I can only imagine how they felt about the Batman's Bane. Where the DCAU version was significantly toned down and more easily defeated, the Batman's Bane was little more than hired muscle with no real agency of his own. Something that's important to bring up is that, as beloved as the DCAU was, the networks were never satisfied with the show's performance with the younger audience demographic, the children that wanted toys. As such, the Batman's creative team went out of their way to make their characters less complex and more toyetic. A great example of this is Bane. In his natural state, Bane is pretty unremarkable, aside from his sense of fashion. But once he activates his Venom pump, he turns into a massive hulking red beast with jagged jigsaw-like teeth. He made his debut in the third episode of Season 1, Traction. I find it quite interesting that they put this fairly radical adaptation of Bane right at the start of the series, almost as if he was being used as a way of demonstrating the show's ethos of being action-centric above all else. Bane was hired by a group of unnamed criminals whose business was impacted by Batman's war on crime, and so he stages some robberies to get Batman's attention. Once the two meet, Bane lulls Batman into a false sense of security by fighting him in his natural state. But once he unleashes his monstrous venomized form, he trounces Batman, leaving him for dead. Batman suffered major injuries and had to spend 3 weeks recuperating before he could face Bane again. But even then, 3 weeks wasn't enough. Batman had to use his experimental Batbot combat mech to take on Bane. Seeing these two titanic figures battling for the latter half of the episode really reinforces a key difference between the Batman and Batman the Animated Series, and that's the influence of the toy companies. Now, that's not to say that the DCAU shows didn't care about introducing character models that were toyetic. Just look at Superman's spacesuit and deep sea diving suit. But the Batman took it to a whole other level. While BTAS's Bane focused heavily on action, they incorporated dynamic wrestling moves with some inventive choreography. Traction, meanwhile, is filled with big characters smashing stuff. It was basically like an episode of The Incredible Hulk. That's not to say that it's bad or wrong, it's just more simplistic. I have to wonder how the people that decry BTAS's Bane feel about this version. If you were one of the people leaving comments about how much you hated Luchador Bane, let me know what you think about this one in the comments. After Batman defeated Bane, once again identifying his Venom dispenser as a weak point, Bane wasn't ever that significant a threat. He remained hired muscle, showing up as a secondary or even tertiary villain in episodes like Rumors, Team Penguin, and the Batman-Superman story. One thing I did find interesting was the episode Brawn, where the Joker stole Bane's Venom in order to make himself more powerful than Batman. Although for some reason the Joker's skin didn't change colour, he just became a hulking clownish brute. Fans of the Arkham games may feel a faint sense of déjà vu when watching this episode. All in all, I have to say that the Batman's version of Bane wasn't really one of their better reinventions. I know they wanted to distinguish themselves from everything that had come before, not just BTAS, but after a fairly middling debut, he just fell by the wayside and became a generic henchman. I completely understand why the animated versions of Bane have streamlined the character substantially. His whole backstory about being a political prisoner driven by a vision of his future self telling him to confront his bat-shaped fears is a bit silly. But the comic book version of Bane was presented as a rival to Batman, not just in terms of brawn, but also intellect. And so far, I don't think any animated versions have managed to successfully demonstrate that. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my channel members. Everyone who was a member at the time of this video's creation is listed on the screen right now. If you want to see your name amongst all these wonderful people, join the channel now. Next time, I'll be back on Tuesday the 1st of April to release an April Fool's Day special looking at what I think is the worst Joker episode of Batman the Animated Series, The Last Laugh, where the Joker poisons the city on April Fool's Day. On Friday, I want to stick with the Clown Prince of Crime and wash the taste of some negativity out of my mouth by chowing down on some delightful Joker fish. Yes, I'm going to be talking about the other best Joker episode, The Laughing Fish. And next Monday, it's time to go back to the Creature Commandos another time to talk about the sad fate of Nina Mazursky, a little girl that only wanted to make friends. Hope to see you then.